Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm finally ready to bring you my Hall of Horrors book series ranking video. It's been some time since I started collecting, and I found out about this series. When I first got into collecting, there wasn't much discussion going around about these 6 books here, and it piqued my interest, and I noticed off the bat there's no Slappy, because every modern series like Horrorland, Most Wanted, Slappy World, there's a bunch of Slappy everywhere. But this series doesn't have Slappy in it. And even for it being kind of like the official / unofficial third arc of Horrorland, this 6-book run really impressed me. And I'm going to save what I want to say in the bulk for the end of the video, because I'm going to be doing a final thoughts on it. But they've impressed me to the point I definitely plan on doing a revisit on these at some point when I get further down the line and reading books I have yet to read and review on my channel, and doing some other stuff and needing to reread some stuff for reviews on the channel. But I would honestly recommend this. Whether you're a first-time Goosebumps reader, you have no idea where to start, these are 6 books that are great to start. There's no overarching arc like the first 2 arcs in Horrorland. These all are on their own standalone level. You can just pick them up and read them. This series kind of starts this whole Crypt Keeper knockoff thing that I really didn't touch in my reviews all that much, and I don't really feel like I need to talk about it because I really don't talk about them in my Slappy World or Most Wanted reviews either. I don't think they really do anything to the story. But I will mention it near the end of the video what I thought about the Crypt Keeper knockoff in this series. So stay tuned for that. And if you want to watch my reviews, this video will be in a playlist for the Hall of Horror series and as a whole. You can feel free to go watch all those reviews and hear what I have to say about each story in depth. I'm just going to kind of skim the surface when I go on my ranking here. So I'm going to start from number 6, since it's a 6-book series, and work my way to number 1. Number 6 is the book I would consider the bottom of the series, and then number 1 would be the top of the series. This is going to be a subjective list. Just know that this is based on how I felt about the books. I know I have a couple of unpopular opinions in this video, it seems, when it comes to this series. And that's perfectly fine. I think Goosebumps is subjective, and I want everyone to know out there, I'm not trying to bash your favorite book by putting it in a certain place. As a matter of fact, 5 out of the 6 books here, I gave a 4 or higher, which is a really good score for me, because I rate on a 5-star basis, and a 4 to me is a B. So 5 out of the 6 at least got a B or higher. So by no means do I think these books are bad. Only one book I would really consider, like, I probably want to recommend, but I would still, like, wouldn't be offended if people wanted to read it. But other than that, I mean, this series just, it's going to set a high precedent for me, and I'm going to be using this series as a comparison for when I finish series like Most Wanted and Slappy World and Horrorland, and see how those series hold up to how I felt about this series. And I know that might be kind of an inadequate comparison, since Most Wanted and all those other series have at least 15 or more books. I'll have to figure out a way to measure them when I ever get to that point, but yeah, this is going to be a good measuring tool for me. Really enjoy this series overall. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I want to save what I want to save for the end of the video and my final thoughts. So we're going to get into the ranking. But before we get into my ranking, please, I want to keep this conversation going. Let me know down in the comment section, where would you rank the Hall of Horrors book series if you have read them? List off all the books in order from your favorite to least favorite. Okay, but I'm doing the opposite here. I'm going to start with my least favorite and work to my favorite. Now, I'm basing my ranking on the review performance I gave it on the review videos. And there's 2 main factors that go into my reviews. One is the entertainment level for me. That's the humor, the scariness, the originality, all that stuff. And then the second level of measurement is the technical aspects of the book, like the writing, is there plot holes, character development, stuff like that, pacing. And in my reviews, I try to blend them all to one thing. Most people kind of get wrapped up when they review things. They get wrapped up in one or the other. They'll just mainly take entertainment and make that the only thing, the only merit of judgment in their reviews. and then there's some people that only take the technical aspect and just like to nitpick the book to death. I'm kind of in the middle. I use both. I guess I lean more towards the entertainment, but I have to say all these books are entertaining in their own way. So that's also another thing to take into account. If you have not read these books, they're very entertaining. So just keep that in mind. What I'm about to say is subjective. You can disagree with me. If you have differences on your list, I'll be glad to see where you put a certain book. This is just where I put them, okay? So let's get into my ranking. Okay, so at number 6, we have book number 4, Why I Quit Zombie School. I gave this book a 3.1 out of 5, which to me a 3.1 is a not good but not bad / okay. This is a passable book. Unfortunately for this book, I think that if for a newer audience that is not well versed in older Goosebumps stuff, this would be a great book. And I can totally see why somebody would think this book is great. It has a lot of scary moments. It has some unique ideas to it. And it's pretty gory, if you ask me. There's some really cool concepts in here. But I would be lying if I said that I wasn't a fan of this book as a whole. The main character, I didn't mind. He had a cool horror hobby. I always like and identify with characters that are into horror. But the character started off being like a nuisance to his family. He gets sent to this zombie boarding school. And by the end, there's a twist involved. Classic to Goosebumps. By switching, the titular villains or the titular characters and changing it to like another monster. And puts the main character back in the same situation they were in before the entire story took place, and it really felt like all for nothing. There's some really cool concepts in this story, like the Reviver Room and the Principal Craven. Really good ideas. Felt very washed out. Nothing was really done with them. The story spent too much focus in the wrong areas, building up the You Gotta Believe Me. Now, You Gotta Believe Me can be done in a good way, but this story was just to the bone repetitive on that, and it got really old. And not to mention, the biggest thing for me, since I'm a seasoned Goosebumps reader, and I'm familiar with, some really obscure Goosebumps stuff, like Triple Header, there's a story in Triple Header Book 2 called Ghoul School that's been used to base stories off of. Stein has used that story to make, like, Creature Teacher and stuff like that. But where Creature Teacher took that idea and perfected it, I think this just carbon copied, essentially, Ghoul School and didn't really do anything different. I mean, all the way down, like, the layout of the plot of that short story is essentially this book. The originality just wasn't there for me. It felt like a missed opportunity. Character really didn't develop at all. And also the origin to the titular zombies at the school, skimmed over origin, just focused, the entire book just focused in the wrong areas, and just felt like a big swing and a miss. So at my number 6, we got book number 4, Hall of Horrors. It's an okay book, but yeah, unfortunately it's a clear bottom for me. So that's why it's so low. Now, from number 5 onward, these books, all of these books got a 4 or higher, and I think these are really exceptional books. This one happens to be above average, though, and it's like it's a pretty decent score. This is book number 6, The Birthday Party of No Return. I gave this book a 4.2 out of 5, which is pretty in the middle of a B for me, or just above average, very good. There's a lot of things to enjoy about this book. I liked how the story didn't have a plot hole by the end. One thing that's a good testament to this story is that there is character development. There's characters that go through things in the story. Some characters are more sympathetic than others. Some, you're just like, whatever. But characters start in one place and they end up in another place, and that's always fun to read. Whether it's from a good to a bad place, or a bad to a good place, or a bad to a bad place, or even worse place. It's always fun, unless they end up in the same place as they were before. But what makes this story really good is the ending. And part of that is because the ending gives a bad ending for the protagonist. And normally I only root for that when the protagonist is awful. And this story has an awful protagonist. This character, to me, I know this is some people's favorite Hall of Horrors book out there, but I could not get behind the main character in this story. The character came off bratty and very unsportsmanlike. Um, so this character is trying to get into this sports camp and has to compete with his rival to qualify to get accepted into the camp. There comes this good luck charm, very reminiscent to It Came From Beneath the Sink. And the story kind of unfolds kind of like How I Learned to Fly, except done with a different angle to it, I would say. But as you see here, The Birthday Party of No Return is the title. Like How I Learned to Fly, this story is very tightly based around the plot of that book. There's a birthday party in that book that leads to the further events that happen in the story and ultimately leads to everything important in that book. The birthday party in this story, however, it's in the title, but it has the same level of appearance as How I Learned to Fly. This book is a big mislead when it comes to the title. It's not about a birthday party more so than it's a competition to get into a sports camp. Stein should have definitely reworked this book title. And yeah, the main problem I had, like I said, is the main character is just really unlikable, and it got in the way for me enjoying this. I gave it such a good score because there wasn't any plot holes by the end. It was pretty airtight. And I can respect an airtight story, so I rounded it up to be fair and get the story credit where it was due. But it ranks at my number 5. I wasn't gung-ho about this one all that much. So then, at my number 4, we have the only special edition in the series, and it's book number 3, The 5 Masks of Dr. Scream. I gave this book a 4.4 out of 5, which is a very high B for me. I think this story is exceptional. It's very creative. It's fantastical. It brings back some callbacks to stories like The Haunted Mask, except there's a brand new, fresh take on it. There's some medieval sorcerer feel to this story. And there's pretty good main characters. Like there's a pair of siblings, a brother and a sister, and they have to go on this fantastical adventure finding these masks to save the day and get themselves out of a situation they're in. And there's just so much creativity and imagination poured into this. I really got behind it, but it does have its issues. Okay. The main issue comes to a technical issue I have with this book, and that's the pacing. The pacing is just so rushed. I mean, from the get-go, it's just hit the ground running. It's like a 170-something page book. There's no let off the gas. And I feel like the story needed some time to breathe and some time to expand. The main issues where it didn't expand are the parts of the book that made it what it was. You had the fantastical adventure trying to find these masks, and part of the adventure is finding the masks and getting to transport to parts of the world where these masks are representing, right? And trying to find the masks, find creative ways to go and see where these masks would be hidden by this evil sorcerer. The problem with that, though, is that it didn't spend enough time on each mask. As a matter of fact, one mask gets completely rushed over by the end. I think only like 3 or 4 got actually touched on, which was kind of a bummer. Because the 5th mask sounded like the most intriguing. It was like an alien pig mask or something. And then on top of that, although we got good character exposition with the 2 main characters, the antagonists really were put on the sideline in this story. I was hoping for more backstory. I was hoping for more context. I was hoping for more of a fantastical ending than what we got. It came off like a big disappointment, and if I can recommend anything about this book to change, it would be the pacing issue and spending more time to make effort in those weaknesses it had. If it did that, it would be a perfect book, in my opinion. But it falls at my number 4 just because it has more problems than some other books in this series. So, yeah, that's The 5 Masks of Dr. Scream, number 4. So my number 3 is actually the first book in this series, and it's book number 1, Claws. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5, which is a low A for me. I was really impressed with this. Coming from, at the time of making this video, I have never read the book Cry of the Cat. I've only watched the TV episode. People were obviously comparing this book to that because there's a cat on the cover, and it's easy to think that, hey, look, this could have some similar ideas. I'm assuming there could be, but one thing I really enjoyed about this story was how out of the box it felt. Every direction it went down a direction I didn't think it was going. And that's very rare for me to think about a Goosebumps book. I mean, there's obviously there's a concept called cat heaven in this. It's like this pet store where something happens to this cat in the story, where the main characters have to go try to find a cat, or the cat, and they find this store called Cat Heaven, and it could be a metaphor for something that's could be tangible to the real heaven or something. I'm not going to spoil it or anything, but yeah, this story felt really mature. It felt very mature for a Goosebumps book. There's a couple of themes in here that make you think about, like, what would you do in this situation, and there comes a point where the main character has to make a really heartbreaking decision. And it's one of these books that it's mainly fueled behind the hysteria of the situation that's going on for one particular character. There's technically two protagonists, but there's really one shining protagonist in the story. Everything just shines through for this character, and the character has to go through a lot of really, creepy stuff, and it gives you an optimistic ending for at least the situation. And for once, an optimistic ending felt really good, especially for what this character had to go through. This was a different take on a Goosebumps book. I feel like this was really thought out by Stein. It felt like a well realized book. But there is a huge drawback I have, and that is in the making the twist make sense. The whole thing behind what these cats, it's just plural, claws. There's one particular cat you have to really care about, but there are multiple cats in the story. And there's something about them that just don't really make sense. It's just there in the story. If you read it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's an obvious plot hole dealing with the whole cat heaven set up at the store, and these cats that are around in the story. As a consequence, there's really nothing there to make that make sense, other than that maybe it just happens when this specific event happens or something. I would have liked to see more explanation on that. It just took away the entire experience of the book, kind of, but not in such a deal-breaking way. I would have tanked it down to a B. I still really liked a lot of other things, more than books I would have a big deal break with, so I gave it a 4.5, and it lands at my number 3. Really good book. Now, my number 2, this is probably near the bottom for a lot of people, but this is my one guilty pleasure. There's a lot of people out there that like Monster Blood 2, and that's a book I openly do not like. This is one I really enjoy. I grew up watching and reading stuff like The Borrowers and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and I was always enamored with the idea of a shrinking story, and I was glad to discover this when I saw that this existed. This is book number 2, Night of the Giant Everything. Now, when I first reviewed this, I had no idea about the adventures of Shrink Man and the long-lost book 26 from Series 2000, The Incredible Shrinking Fifth Grader. And I read that after this, and I love them both equally for their own ways. This book, what I love about it is that it's bonkers. This book is a love letter to Original 62. This feels like a throwback of throwbacks. This is just, feels like it would fit in. Either you love it or you hate it, but it feels like it would fit in to books around that time. I loved everything about this. I don't know what it was about it. Something about the story captured my inner child, I guess. It was something that if I would have saw this on the Goosebumps TV show, or if this was made into a movie, I would absolutely be in love with this. And I am in love with it. Really, the only negative I have with it is how outdated the kid's hobby is in the story. The main character, he has a magic hobby. And when that's my only negative, that's more like a nitpick than anything. But that did kind of detract me from the story, because the story does play around magic, kind of. There are some books in Goosebumps that do that. There's one particular one I actually have never read. It's from the original 62. It's a Bad Hair Day. There's one of the only two original 62 books I have not read. I know that's magic oriented, but seeing something this recent with magic just felt kind of off. I felt like Stein was kind of out of touch with his audience for this series, especially the time this was released. But everything in this story had me. I mean, from the red herrings. There was multiple different avenues this story was presenting the reader, and it was like, hey, this could be this could be that, this could be the cause, and of course it gives a really weird ending. And I know a lot of people don't like it, how weird it is, but I enjoyed it. This was one that I totally acknowledge this is a unpopular opinion of mine. I gave this a 4.8. I don't know if I said this, but I gave this a 4.8 out of 5. Yeah, if I can go back in time, I probably wouldn't give it such a high rating, but I let the entertainment side of my reviewing take control on this one. I was just thoroughly entertained with this, and this is purely just a guilty pleasure of mine. Absolutely love this book. So yeah, my number 2, we have Night of the Giant Everything. And then at number 1, now this book I'm going to take away as one of my all-time favorite Goosebumps books. I initially gave this a 4.7 out of 5, but before I reveal the book, I am changing the score to a 4.9. Only because I've thought about my main issue with the book, and I kind of have accepted it over time as I've thought about it. And I might be stretching it very thin with some people like, you're stretching the truth here about this book, but I really enjoy this one. I'm just going to change it from a 4.7 to a 4.9, and this is book number 5, Don't Scream. This is my favorite Hall of Horrors book, and easily, if not my favorite modern Goosebumps book I've read, this is one of them. This book feels the most modern out of all of them. When I think of modern Goosebumps, when I think of stuff Stein should be trying to commentate on and talk about, what this book does fulfills that need. Smart technology has become a thing in recent years. We've known it for like over a decade. And it feels like this is like the only Goosebumps book trying to commentate on that. Very strange. But I loved everything about this book. I think this book's absolutely brilliant. The main character, some people have tried to accuse this character for being one-dimensional based on the decisions made throughout the story. But I wouldn't even chalk it up to being one-dimensional for the decisions, because if you think about it, if you have not read this book, this story introduces this concept of an electropath that moves through technology. And the main character finds a phone with this electropath on it. And throughout the story, this electropath can move from device to device. So even if the character were to leave behind said phone or destroy one object, the electropath was always going to follow them as a result. Now, the negative I had before, and it's still a negative for me, is that by the end, the ending reveals something about the electropath and what the electropath has done. After the course of the events of the book and the main character going through what they did with their bullies and the electropath itself, the electropath pulls off a move that I feel like could have been done at any point in the story, and it still does not... I mean, there is an answer in the story about why the electropath has chosen the main character, but it's a very loose one, and I feel like it could have... It's not the strongest reason, but I think it works. So when I thought about it, I'm like, it's not as bad as I made it out to be in my original review. That's why I boosted it up. But there is a problem. Like, this character could have done this earlier on in the story. It made no sense why Stein chose to wait till the very end of the story to introduce this concept, and I'm still kind of bummed about it, because I want to give this book a 5 out of 5, but I just can't. But I will give it a 4.9. I will give it some bonus points just because how much I love it, and how much this book has lived in my head rent-free since I've read it. This is one I think about all the time, and this is a great book, and I will forever love this book, I think. Even on a reread. I definitely plan on rereading this at some point, so yeah. That's my number 1, Don't Scream. So yeah, that was my ranking. I kind of want to get into my final thoughts of the series, all in all, real quick. For it being a 6-book series, like I said, Don't Scream being able to deliver one of my favorite Goosebumps stories of all time really impressed me. There's only been one other series I think that has delivered something close to that, and that's Slappy World with It's Alive, It's Alive. I really love that book. That was a really special book to me. This one is very special. And, you know, I wish more people would talk about this series. I've seen a lot of people bash this series. I'm here to say that I support this series. I am a champion. I want everyone to try these books out. I think there's something here for everyone. I think there's legitimately something here to enjoy for everyone. Whether it be one particular book or another, something is out there for you in this series. I'm going to put a hard stamp of confidence on that. I mean, the only thing that feels kind of weird about this series as a whole is that it introduces this Crypt Keeper knockoff character, and it's supposed to be like Horrorland Arc 3, and trust me, I have not read Horrorland at the time of this ranking, but the character is kind of like a throwaway character. There's really nothing special about them. They just introduce the characters coming in to tell the story, and then at the very end of the book, they introduce the next character that's going to be in the next story, and they give a little preview. It was kind of forgettable. The narrator guy was kind of forgettable, and it's not even worth talking about. So that part of the books, I just really don't care about all that much. But it's there. You might get a kick out of it, you might not. I just thought I would mention it. Another thing that I want to bring up is that I'm thankful for this series because I think this series inspired Stein to do away with the overarching arcs, which thankfully happened because I couldn't. I'm not gonna lie. I would be totally turned away from having to do an arc setup for each modern series of Goosebumps. I'll get so old so quick. I'm glad he tried it in Horrorland and he realized it just didn't work. And as a result, I think he had to pull a lot of stuff that from his memory to do this series. But I would say, as a whole, this series is going to be a big measuring stick for me. A huge measuring stick, actually. I would be really shocked if I ended up liking something from the modern era as a whole series as much as this. Horrorland's unventured territory. I'm about halfway through Most Wanted at this point. I'm not really seeing huge promise there. And Slappy World might do it, but I have to get through a couple of the slappier books to really make my decision because there's so much slappy. Yeah, but one thing I love about this series is that there's no sequels, there's no slappy, it's just brand new stories. Offers something new to the table, even though some books did take elements from former books, and some books did bring some originality to it. Some books did do something different. I'm glad that this series exists, and I can't wait to see what everybody else thinks about it. So let me know down in the comment section what you thought about the Hall of Horror series as a whole, and what books you would rank in what specific order. I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.